Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, distinguished officers, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for the International Committee of the Red Cross and for me to have the chance to say a few words, not so much from an economist perspective, personal perspective, but from the perspective of my organization, the ICRC, which is working and present both in Syria and Iraq with over 1,300 people working daily and also by night, together with the Iraq Red Crescent and the Syrian Arab Red Crescent in the field with a lot of different activities. And I would say that it is little known generally that militaries across the world interact very regularly with a humanitarian organization like the International Committee of the Red Cross. And in practice, especially when we look at Syria and Iraq, it is critical to help us all prevent and alleviate human suffering. So it is a real pleasure for the ICRC to participate in this Moscow Conference on International Security, and I wish to thank Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu and the organizers for inviting us and hosting us here in Moscow. I would like to say that actually we, the International Committee of the Red Cross, we are an eyewitness to the suffering of women, men and children living through the wars in the Middle East. Across Iraq and Syria, we work on a wide range of emergency and rehabilitation projects. And I might say that it's not new in a sense that I remember 30 years ago being a junior delegate with the ICRC in northern Iraq, already trying with my organization to bring assistance and protection to people affected by armed conflicts. The ICRC recognizes the complexities of the dynamics on the ground, with people needs varying from place to place and across time. We both respond to emergency situations and in areas away from the front line, we help people to recover and to rebuild their lives and livelihoods. Just to give an idea, last year in Syria, we provided food to more than 8 million people. We sought to restore clean water and shelter for 17 million. And in Iraq, we provided cash assistance to 120,000 people, visited 54,000 people detained in detention places, and we supported also 16 physical rehabilitation centers. Currently, we are pilot testing what we call a durable returns program in the northwest of Iraq to strengthen the community's ability to return home through a combination of cash assistance, support to rebuilding home, and protection interventions. This comprehensive approach allows us to combine issues that have proven difficult to solve independently of one another. Across the years, we have seen the battles rage across vast parts of Iraq and Syria, including in cities. Today, if there is one place in Syria that encapsulates the prevailing humanitarian challenges, it is the Al-Hol camp in the northeast of the country. The ICRC president, Peter Maurer, and other colleagues recently returning from the camp told me of harrowing scenes there. Thousands of women and children have suddenly arrived from areas formerly under the control of the Islamic State group. Many children and wounded are dying simply because they don't have access to any health care. Others are traumatized, and many children have lost their parents. While media attention has tended to focus on the relatively smaller proportion of foreign fighters and their families, the desperate plight of numerous Syrians and Iraqi families in the camps has largely been overlooked. All are extremely vulnerable, and there is much uncertainty over their future. The ICRC is expanding its humanitarian work there and helps ensure that basic rights are protected. Yet, we remain deeply concerned for people's welfare. Displacement continues to affect millions across both countries. Question mark remains not only over the feasibility, but sometimes over the security of large-scale returns, with some fighting ongoing and fears of escalation in certain places. While parties to the conflict can be commended for their efforts to avoid a massive escalation in Idlib, there are still regular hostilities, and future escalation could cause new waves of displacements. We encourage continued efforts to avoid further large-scale confrontations and the suffering that would undoubtedly result. Those seeking to return home face sometimes death and injury risks because of weapon contamination in urban areas, which further makes resuming economic activities challenging. The destruction of property on the images that you have shown us just before, and the critical destruction of civilian infrastructure during the fighting, often the result of heavy explosive weapons being used in densely populated areas, further hinders the rebuilding of livelihoods. The ICRC does all what it can to support the provision of essential services in Iraq and Syria, starting with healthcare and water provision. Yet the damages to water and electricity networks, to schools and healthcare facilities will take lots of time and money to rebuild. On all sides, unknown numbers of people have gone missing. Our teams are swamped with pleas from families desperate for news of their loved ones. Without answers, they can be left in an agonizing state of uncertainty for years or even for decades. And today we must ask, how can we help rebuild lives, not only countries? Our priority is to put people at the center, to bring humanitarian relief where it is most needed, and to make life as bearable as possible. Our criteria for engagement is the intensity and the urgency of the needs, and our mandate for action is international humanitarian law. IHL, international humanitarian law, makes no judgment on the motives for fighting, and it does not discriminate among the different categories of people protected: civilians, prisoners, the sick and wounded. This year, we mark the 17th anniversary of the Geneva Conventions, and I am reminded that it was militaries and humanitarians together who devised these laws of war and the principles for pragmatic and practical use in the battlefield. IHL recognized, and the negotiators of the Geneva Conventions recognized the dilemmas, including the legitimate rights of states for security. They designed IHL to navigate between military necessity and humanitarian concerns, and to achieve the best protection for the people affected by armed conflict. The primary responsibility for respecting IHL, of course, falls on states. Yet we witness a general trend of diffusion of responsibility for IHL violations. States must not only respect IHL themselves, they must also influence those states or non-state actors they partner with or support, so that the latter comply with IHL too. In the Middle East and beyond, we also hear states and their partners claiming that the law does not apply because they are fighting individuals or groups designated as terrorists or foreign terrorist fighters rather than a conventional enemy. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I want just to highlight 3 key areas to better respect IHL, and this would go a long way to reduce the suffering witnessed on the ground. First, states have an obligation to uphold human dignity at all times, including in places of detention, and to ensure conditions are in line with international standards. The ICRC, through its visits to places of detention, can help authorities to improve standards. We offer our expertise and services and call on states and other parties to allow appropriate access to places of detention. Second, parties must reassess and adapt their choice of weapons in urban warfare. We urge states and all parties to conflict to avoid the use of explosive weapons with wide-range effects in highly densely populated areas due to the significant likelihood of indiscriminate impact and far-reaching harm to civilians. And third, people have the right to know what happened to their missing relatives. Under IHL, parties to conflict are obliged to provide information on the missing and make efforts to put families back together, no matter who they are. resolving the cases of missing persons has a long-term positive impact on reconciliation and stability. And the ICRC supports parties to conflict to fulfill their obligation in this regards. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we do not make these calls lightly or without understanding the challenges and dilemmas faced by states to balance their international responsibilities, positive influence, and sovereignty and security concerns. It is indeed encouraging to see efforts of many states to try to meet such challenges. Yet more can be done. We will continue to offer our expertise and support and welcome dialogue on how this might best be achieved. To conclude, I express my sincere hope that the positive momentum between the ICRC and major stakeholders, including Russia, with regard to addressing the humanitarian situation in Syria and beyond, can be strengthened. This can go a long way towards alleviating the terrible suffering we are witnessing in Syria and Iraq and providing an enabling environment for reconstruction and development. Thank you very much.